Hello everyone, welcome to the last video of Java Fundamentals. In this video, we're going to learn about methods inside of classes. So in video number 9, you learned about how to create and use your own methods, but Java has also created a lot of methods for you, and you can use them without creating them yourself. Those are methods inside of classes, and you've actually already learned about some of them. When you were learning about scanner and array lists, you actually learn some methods inside of classes. But in this video, we're going to learn about even more. So the first method that we're going to learn about is parseInt, and that comes inside the class integer. So let's initialize an int because that's what the method returns. All right, so to use it, you first type the name of the class, which is integer. Make sure you have a capital I and dot parseInt. That's the name of the method. So parse, and make sure you have a capital I once again. All right, and then the parameters. So you need one parameter, which is a string. So for example, 43. And what parseInt does is it converts this string into an int. So this string right over here, it's a string because it's surrounded by quotation marks. Even though 43 would normally just be an int, since this is surrounded by quotation marks, it's considered a string. And if you just did int a equals quotation marks 43, then it wouldn't work because this is a string and you need an int. So parseInt, it just converts this string right over here into an integer. So normally, if you didn't have parseInt, then if you tried to initialize a like this, then it would return an error. But let's try to print it and then see if it works. All right, it does. It prints out 43. And keep in mind that if you didn't have a number here, if you had a string like hello world and you try to use parseInt on it, then it would return an error. And also keep in mind that if you wanted to turn a double into an int, then you would use casting. And if you forgot what that is, then you can go back to video number 2. But right now, let's explore some of the other methods. The second method that we're going to explore is value of, and that comes from the class string. So let's initialize a string because that's what the method returns. So to use that method, you first type the name of the class string with the capital S dot, and then value, make sure you have a capital O. And then parameter, the parameter would just be a number. So in this case, 43 is an int. And if you just try to do string b equals 43, that wouldn't work because this right here is an int and you need a string. So what string.valueOf does is it converts this right here into a string. So now let's try to print this out and see if it works. All right, it does. It prints out 43 two times. All right, so now we are getting into the class called math. And math actually has a lot of methods. And if you can't remember all of them, that's fine. I'll tell you which ones are important. So the first method is called pow, which is short for power. So what it basically does is it takes one number to the power of another number. Right, so to use it, you do math.pow, and then the parameters, which would be two doubles, or they can also be ints if you want. So the first number is the base, and the second number is the exponent. So what this is, this would return 4 to the power of 3, which is 64. So let's run this and see if it prints that. All right, it does print out 64. And you can also use this method with doubles, as I mentioned. I'm just going to copy this system.out.println statement because we're going to use it many times. All right, so let's suppose you wanted to find the square root of 2. In that case, you would do 2 to the power of 0.5. This right over here is the same thing as the square root of 2. So let's run this and see if it prints out the square root of 2. All right, it prints out 1.414 and so on, which is approximately the square root of 2. And you can use this to print out any other roots of a number. So for example, if you wanted to print out the cube root, you would do 2 to the power of 1 over 3. And remember, you can't just do 1/3 because that's int division and Java would round down. So you have to do 1.0/3. So this would print out the cube root of 3, or sorry, the cube root of 2. All right, so it does. All right, and the next method that we're going to talk about is abs, which is short for absolute value. So the absolute value of a number is just the distance from the number to 0. So the absolute value of a positive number is the number itself, and the absolute value of a negative number would just be the number without the negative sign. So this method right over here is pretty self-explanatory. The next method is floor. So math.floor, and the parameter would be a double, just like for math.abs. So what this does is it returns the largest integer that is less than or equal to the parameter. So let's say, for example, we do math.floor 3.14. That would return 3 because 3 is the largest integer that is not greater than 3.14. So basically, you can just think of it as it cuts out all the digits after the decimal. And if you were to do, let's say, math.floor 4, that would return 4 because 4 is the greatest integer that is not greater than 4. So let's run this. All right, it prints out the correct values. All right, so now we are getting into math.ceil, which is short for ceiling. And the parameter would just be a double. So math.ceil is kind of like the opposite of floor. It returns the lowest integer that is greater than or equal to the parameter. So math.ceil 3.14 would return 4, and math.ceil 4 would also return 4, because in both cases 4 is the lowest integer that is not less than the parameter. So let's run this. All right, it prints out 4 for both cases. Now the next method is math.round. And the parameter would be a double. So math.round, it rounds the number to the nearest integer. So it just looks at the number after the decimal here. If it's 5 through 9, then it would round up. If it's 1 through 4, then it would round down. So if you round 4.5, it would round up to 5. If you were to round, let's say 4.4999, then it would round down to 4. All right, let's run this. All right, it prints out the correct answers. All right, the next method is math.random. and you don't need any parameters for this one. And what it does is it returns a random number that is between 0 and 1. And it could be 0, but it cannot be 1. All right, so let's run this 10 times. So let's use a for loop. Let's run it 10 times and let's see what it prints out each time. All right, so each time it returns a number that is between 0 and 1, and it could be 0, but it cannot be 1. And keep in mind that this right over here is not greater than 1, because this right over here just means that the number is very small. All right, so now if you wanted to use math.random to generate useful numbers, for example, if you wanted to pick either 0 or 1 at random, what could you do? Well, first, since you want to generate an integer, then you would need to first integer cast, because otherwise math.random would return a double, and you would do math.random times 2. So what this does is, if math.random returns a number that is less than 0.5, then this right over here would be 0. And if math.random returns a number that is greater than 0.5, then this right over here would return 1. All right, so it returns either 0 or 1 at random. So let's run this. All right, yeah, each time it just prints 0 or 1 at random. And we can extend this. So if you wanted to print a number from 0 to 2, then you would do math.random times 3. If you wanted to print a number from 0 to 9, you would do math.random times 10. Now, what if you wanted to print a number between 1 and 10? So we don't want it to be between 0 and something. In that case, that's basically the same thing as picking a random number from 0 to 9 and then adding 1. All right, so let's run this. All right, so each time it prints out a random number from 1 to 10. So I understand that everyone's math level here is different, and the methods that I'm gonna get into now, they have to do with trigonometry and logarithms. And I know that not everyone here knows what those are. So if you don't understand anything that I cover from now on, that's totally fine. But before I get into those methods, I'll tell you that the important methods to remember are math.pow and math.random, because any of the other methods, you can easily make them yourself. All right, so now I'm going to get rid of all of this to make some space. So the first method I'm going to talk about is math to radians with a capital R. So what that does is, and you need a degrees for a parameter, so 180 degrees, for example. So what this does is it turns this into radians. So what it basically does is it multiplies it by pi over 180. And knowing that, if you ever need to access the value of pi, you can do math.to_radians 180, because 180 times pi over 180 is pi. So let's run this. Yeah, and it prints out the first few digits of pi. And then the next method is the opposite of that, which is 2 degrees. All right, so what it would do is, so the parameter would just be a number, and it will multiply it by 180 over pi. All right, so you get this. All right, and then now I'm going to talk about math.sine, math.cosine, and math.tangent. So math.sine, it takes a number as a parameter and it calculates the sine of that number. And note that the number is in radians. So if you wanted to find the sine of 90 degrees, for example, then you would first do math.to radians of 90. And then if you run this, then it will print out the sine of 90 degrees, which is 1. And there's also math.cos and math.tan. Those are the other trigonometric functions. And there's also the inverse trigonometric functions. So, for example, if you wanted to calculate arcsine of a number, you would do a sine and then a number. So this is basically the opposite of sine. So sine of 90 degrees is 1, therefore arcsine of 1 is 90 degrees. And keep in mind that this would return a number in radians. So if you wanted to turn it to degrees, you would do math.to degrees of this. All right, so it prints out 90. And then there's also a cos and a tan. Those are the other inverse trigonometric functions. And now we're done with trigonometric functions. So the last category that we're going to talk about is logarithms. So first there's math.log10 of a number. So what logarithms basically are, so this is asking 10 to the power of what equals 100. You know that 10 to the power of 2 is 100, therefore this right over here should return 2. So let's run this. All right, it does print out 2. And then there's also math.log. Right, and then a number as a parameter. And this, what this does is instead of using 10 as the base, it uses e as the base. So it returns e to the power of what equals 100. And e, that is Euler's number, and it's approximately 2.718. How to calculate it? It has to do with compounding interest. If you don't know what it is, that's totally fine. But I'll just run this to show you the result of this right over here. All right, so approximately 4.6. All right, so now we're done. I hope this course was really helpful to you. If it was, share it with your friends because it might also be helpful for them. And make sure to check out my YouTube channel and subscribe because I have and will continue to make more educational content that could be helpful for you. And I would definitely encourage checking out the course AP Computer Science A in my YouTube channel because by learning this course, even if you're not fully proficient with this course, you have prepared yourself to take AP Computer Science A. Thanks for watching. I'm Jesse Lee, and I hope to see you in my other videos. Goodbye.